Okay, folks, hello and welcome to this meeting of the Transport Portfolio or Executive Member meeting at Portsmouth City Council. I'm Gerald Vernon-Jackson and I am chairing this meeting, and I'm the Cabinet Member for Transport. Just the usual things: if there's a fire alarm, it's real, there are no practices, and we assemble by Queen Victoria outside the civic offices. And if you've signed in, can you sign out so that people don't search for you? And if you can use the microphone when you're speaking, it means the cameras will go to you, so you are broadcast to the nation and are there for posterity. So if we quickly run round and say who is who, let's do from the back to the front.
Brian Madgwick, Independent Councillor for Paulsgrove and Transport Opposition Spokesman.
Thank you. Ian?
Ian Saunders, representing Portsmouth Cycle Forum.
Nice to see you. Let's start with Hayley.
Hayley Chivers, Transport Planning Manager.
Gareth James, Solent Transport, Future Transport Zone Project Manager for Portsmouth.
Kirsty Routledge, Principal Transport Planner.
Michelle Love, Safer Travel Manager.
Felicity Tidbury, Assistant Director for Transport.
Denise Bastow, Parking Office Manager.
Kevin McKee, Parking Operations Manager.
Barbara Thomas, Transport Planner, TROs.
Matt Crowder, Park and Operations Team Leader.
Sorry. Yeah, Albert Dudley speaking from Stamshaw, basically.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dudley.
Richard Gould speaking on agenda item 7 only.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Hunt.
Yeah, Councillor Hunt, that's the one of the ward councillors, Stamshaw, Tipner, North End and Buckland, commonly known as Nelson Ward. I'm here to speak on the same item as the gentleman behind me.
Excellent. Graham.
Councillor Graham Heaney, Labour Councillor for St Jude Ward and Opposition Spokesperson on Transport.
Okay, and we have apologies from our Conservative opposite number, Simon Bosher. Michelle, have I done something wrong? You were waving at me.
No, Joe. No, Councillor Vernon-Jackson. I just realised Councillor Bosher wasn't here. Apart from that, it's all good.
Good. Okay. So, folks, just to say, I've had concerns raised with me about the Lake Road project by the tree wardens. We've just been to do a walk round with them and colleagues to look to see if we can address their concerns. So I'm postponing that item and we'll come back to that on Friday of next week and see if we can address their concerns there. Okay, so then, so Ian, I'm sorry, on that bit you're redundant because the bit we're not going to get to it, so we're not going to hear your words of wisdom. I know. Okay. Now that worries me because I have got. Oh yeah, no, wait. So yep, sorry. We've got Lake Road, bike share, bike hangers, and corrals. Okay. All right. Let's move through the agenda, colleagues. Are there any declarations of interest that anybody needs to declare? No. Okay. Let's do item 3 then, which is disabled parking places on Karen Avenue and Landguard Road. Denise, I think you are leading us through that.
Yeah. So this report is to consider the objections that we have received to Traffic Regulation Order 158, which was advertised to introduce 34 disabled parking bays in various roads in Portsmouth. We received objections to 2 bays, one in Karen Avenue and one in Landguard Road. The details of the grounds of the objections are included within the report. And the recommendation is to ask you to improve the implementation of the disabled bays in Karen Avenue, outside number 27, and in Landguard Road, opposite numbers 180 to 182. And also to note that the remainder of the Traffic Regulation Order 158 came into operation under TRO 158A on the 10th of July, as no objections were received to those proposals, so they've already been introduced. Any proposal approved following this report would be brought into operation under TRO 158B of 2023. And just a slight bit of additional information to say, we've also contacted the landlords of the property in Landguard Road, asking them if they would consider allocating one of the 2 parking spaces which are underneath the flats at 185 Landguard Road specifically to one resident, but they have come back to say that they're unable to disadvantage the other residents by allocating one of the 2 parking spaces just to one person.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So Denise, if you're taking them one by one, the Karen Avenue one, there's an objection from somebody else who's a blue badge holder who is concerned that there's very little parking at down that cul-de-sac, but the view expressed in the report is that the car concerned is normally parked in that cul-de-sac anyway, therefore making it a disabled bay is going to not disadvantage anybody else, because in reality it's always there anyway.
Exactly, yes. The objector, I don't believe, is a blue badge holder, but yes, the person who's applied for the badge has a vehicle which is already parking in the location. So, as we said, it's not actually taking away a loss of space because the vehicle's already parked there anyway.
Okay. And then we get to Landguard Road, which I know better. I have to say, I think the response from Vivid Housing shows their normal level of lack of care for their residents. If you've got car parking underneath and you've got one of the residents who is disabled and can't walk, it seems to me entirely logical that you would allocate one of them for that person who needs the shortest walk. But Vivid don't seem to support that idea, and at which point I don't think we get left with any choice. But I think this is, as usual, Vivid Housing having very little concern for the welfare of their tenants, but that won't be news to anybody. Graham, any thoughts?
Not particularly. I mean, I think I agree with the recommendations. I obviously wanted to hear whether there was any possibility of the space being used, but if they're not going to do it, it would seem perverse to disadvantage the resident by not allowing them to have the space. So, and if the ward councillors are all happy, I think no problem, really.
Okay.
I agree with Graham.
Okay.
Yeah, totally.
Lovely. In which case, I think I'm satisfied that we should go ahead and grant these 2. So I think that is the view. Moving on to item 4, Lake Road, we've withdrawn and comes back. Item 5, the local transport plan for Kirsty. That starts at page 87.
Yep, thank you. So this report is to provide the first annual monitoring report for the Portsmouth Transport Strategy, the Local Transport Plan 4 or LTP4. The Portsmouth Transport Strategy was adopted in October 2021, providing a strategy for enabling residents and visitors to get into, out of and through the city safely and efficiently on all modes of transport through improvements to connectivity. The LTP4 is a statutory document required of each local transport authority, and it is required to have 2 parts: a strategy which sets out the long-term policies and schemes to address the transport challenges and deliver transport improvements, and a short-term implementation plan detailing the transport improvements which will support the strategy. The Portsmouth Transport Strategy covers the period 2021 to 2038, and the Portsmouth LTP4 Implementation Plan prioritises schemes to be delivered over 3-year periods, with the first of the 3-year rolling programmes between 2022-23 and 24-25. Over the life of the Transport Strategy, annual monitoring reports will be produced to monitor and evaluate the delivery of the Transport Strategy and Implementation Plan. Detailed AMRs, or annual monitoring reports, will be produced at the end of each implementation plan period, which is every 3 years, with a snapshot report being produced in the interim years. So this first annual monitoring report provides a highlight snapshot report of the first year of LTP4 and gives information on progress towards the vision and strategic objectives. A number of schemes and projects have been completed or are in development during the first year of LTP4, which is a long-term 17-year strategy, and it's therefore recognised that some of the improvements will take time to deliver. Progress will continue to be made on a range of schemes during the next year of LTP4, supporting the 18 policies within the strategy.
Okay, Kirsty, thanks so much indeed. I haven't got any questions. Brian, have you got any? Graham? Any questions or any thoughts?
I have a couple of questions, yes.
Of course. Leap in.
There's no deputation on this, no?
Nope.
No, okay. Just in relation to the time period, is this the financial year 22-23 that the period covers? Because I wasn't quite clear.
I see a nod from Felicity.
Okay, that's
yes, it is, yeah.
It is, right, okay, right. Because in some respects, I suppose you could say that what's here on page 98 about the cycling and walking strategy doesn't really maybe reflect what's been done, because it doesn't mention the fact that there's been work done to develop other proposals within the area north of Tangier Road and up by the Airport Service Road and so on. And it talks about only 500 metres of the shared walking and cycling route on the Eastern Road being completed, which is true. So I'm not sure it entirely reflects maybe what's happening, and I'm not quite sure why maybe some of the development stuff isn't in there. Is that because it's not completed, or what's the reason for that?
Are we shy about saying how well we've done, Kirsty?
I think being more of a snapshot report, we tried to pull out some of the key highlights that have happened, but certainly we'll take that on board and, for any future ones. Thank you.
Thou shalt not hide thy light under a bushel.
And just a question really about the Eastern Road one. I mean, we've had some issues, as you will be aware, and we can only do work on Eastern Road at certain times of the year because of the hedge. Where are we on that? Are we making any progress? Is any work going to commence this autumn to complete work?
I think the answer to that is probably. The issue, we can't do work on the hedge during nesting season, and nesting season seems to be very long for different varieties of bird, so we can't do that. But I think there's also the concern about taking out that hedge that is an attractive thing, and whether there is an alternative that would mean that we could keep the hedge and we could make sure that the space is identified specifically for cyclists, because it's a really important cycle commute route, and whether there, with the rebuilding of the footpath along the sea wall, whether, if that was properly lit, whether that would produce an alternative route for pedestrians, so that there wasn't conflict between pedestrians and cyclists outside the caravan park. So there's work going on to look to see what the options are, because it's absolutely essential that we get that route for cyclists, commuting cyclists, done properly and effectively, so that it is safe. But I think we also have to have some concern for the natural environment as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there was issues also about legal control of land and whether there was going to have space to put replacement hedges, etc. So I'm happy for the update, but I won't pursue it now. I'm sure there'll be further developments. We can pick up on that at another time. My second question was relating to school streets. We appear to have 2 school streets that are now permanent, and we have 2 that are still presumably in development because they were September, November 22. They were trialling them. Are those ones going to be made permanent, and have we got any more schools applying to become or to create school streets?
I'm sure Michelle can enlighten us.
That paper's coming in September. So yes.
Hold on for a month.
Yes. So there's obviously been a lot of pre-engagement work, and we wanted to just stop and take stock, because the trials are very successful, provided that we can provide enough people to man the closures during the trial periods. That's always been one of the things that it hinges upon, is the fact that there are not that many volunteers. So while the schools are very engaged, they can't provide sort of large-scale numbers of stewards. So at the moment, there's a paper coming back in September about the permanent closures for St Jude's and Brambles. And then there's also our recommendations of how we could continue the School Streets programme, but potentially without a sort of labour-intensive trial period, so that we could then go ahead with resident engagement and potentially move to signage or bollards rather than have that trial period. But that will be wholly dependent on whether the residents and school community within that area are agreeable to that. And if they would like a trial, then obviously we will work with them to do that too.
Now, Michelle, I'm not sure I'm allowed to say this.
You're probably not then, are you?
No.
Go on.
We don't man anything anymore. We staff things.
Oh.
Brian is particularly hot on inclusive language.
No, you're absolutely correct, and thank you for identifying that. So, yeah, to staff it, you're correct, yeah. So you probably are allowed to say that in hindsight, aren't you?
Possibly.
So, thank you.
We have to keep Brian happy. Okay.
I'm happy all the time you keep cyclists away from pedestrians, you know that.
We try to make sure that everybody is safe. Okay, with those bits, thanks very much indeed, everybody, for the work on the LTP. It seems to have gone well, and there's masses more to do, and look forward to this next year. So thank you very much indeed. Now come to the bike share scheme. If Gareth does his introduction first, then I'll come to you. Is that okay? Great. Gareth, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councillor. So this is an update report of the bike share rental scheme, which launched in October 2022. It's funded through the Solent Future Transport Zone, and this report provides an update on the scheme's progress and also sets out the strategy for future expansion plans. So the recommendations are to note the progress of the bike share rental scheme, to give it its full title, Bevel Bikes by Breeze, since its October launch, to approve the bike share expansion strategy set out in Appendix A, and also to note that an update report on the Solent Future Transport Zone programme, including bike share, will be brought into the Cabinet Member for Transport early next year. So I just wanted to highlight rather than go through the whole report, just highlight a few key points, both in terms of just a sort of reminder of what the scheme constitutes, and also how the performance is going to date. So from section 4 of the report, which is specifications and operations, I think it's worth noting that it is a fully docked system, so there's no sort of free floating or painted bays or anything like that. All bikes are in docks, and it's a mix of pedal bikes and e-bikes. And the other thing related to that is that the parking compliance is currently at 95%, and very little negative feedback has been received, which I think is largely a testament to having the fully docked system. And then section 5, the performance summary, highlights a few key figures. So as of the end of June, we had 66 docks and or 66 docking bays, I should say, as more docks in each bay. And then we had 216 bikes. There's been another 60 bikes added since then, and there's another 45 bikes due to be delivered next week. The number of active users was 4,108, and those users doing an average of 9 rides per active user in June. And the customer satisfaction of those using the scheme is at 90%. And then that brings us on to section 6 around scheme expansion. So there's next week there will be approximately 20 new docking bays installed. The council's worked with Solent Transport and Beryl to develop a strategy for future expansion to guide the future expansion of the scheme towards ensuring it meets the council's wider transport strategy. I think the key points it's probably worth just going through in that expansion strategy are that in order to generate modal shift and to seek to improve connectivity across the city, that proposal should meet some or all of the following principles. So we have areas served less well by public transport. We also have at transport interchanges or close to other transport modes to enable connectivity between modes. Located at key destinations such as large employers and attractors in the city, including on private land. Locations supporting the economy such as local shops and restaurants. Locations with good cycle infrastructure nearby, providing safe routes and discouraging footway riding. Located near to residential areas with a focus on those demographics that are proven to have or are more likely to have propensity to use bike share, while simultaneously working to reduce barriers to bike share use across all demographics. Just to note, there is a mistake actually in the appendix where it says scooter use there, but that will be corrected for the subsequent version. It is bike share use. Areas of existing high demands where increased provision is required. Visible and accessible locations. Proximity to the nearest existing bike share dock and current usage level of nearby docks. Proximity to other shared transport schemes, and any stakeholder requests. We get a lot of requests that come in either directly to the council or to Beryl, and they are of course taken into account as well. So I think that's probably the right level of detail. I hope it is anyway to read out, but happy as always to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gareth. Ian, welcome.
Thank you. Portsmouth Cycle Forum welcomes and thanks the Council for bringing this report forward. It is always useful to be able to see data and future planning for expansion. It is interesting to note that the report highlights that June 2023 saw around 4,500 trips travelled, totalling over 7,000 miles, and the average ride length was 1.4 miles, which is right in the sweet spot of the range of journeys that are being targeted to be converted from motor vehicles to sustainable travel modes. It also highlights just how many trips and distances that people who cycle but do not utilise the hire bike scheme may travel in the everyday journeys that must take place and are not recorded. This data is essential to enable network planning for capacity across the city. We hope that the data about the routes travelled and preferred by hire bike scheme users are also recorded and available to the Council to enable this work to take place under the scheme developments of the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan and the local transport strategy. This data will only improve with the expansion of the scheme as outlined in today's report. Whilst we understand the process that has so far underlined the identification and development of bike hub and often e-scooter parking locations, however, footway space is already at a premium and the continuation of locating micro-mobility hubs on them is not sustainable. There will come a time when these will have to concentrate being located on the road with subsequent loss of a parking space. If the Council has a desire to increase bike share usage, then the start and end of journeys will need to be located where people need and want to access them. Secondary shopping areas such as Fratton Road, London Road, Cosham High Street, Elm Grove, Albert Road and Milton Market need more coverage to ensure that there is availability at all times and give local residents the confidence that there will be bikes available when they need them. For this reason, we welcome the ability to be able to request bike hub locations on the Council website and delighted that there is such a wide geographic spread of locations being recorded. As has happened with the residential bike hanger project, we welcome a robust criteria scoring being developed and is then able to transparently assess, determine and support the future identification and rollout of bike hub locations. Accessibility and correct positioning will be the key area of any bike hub scheme or general bike parking and storage expansion. It seems to be the perfect opportunity to trial locations under an experimental traffic regulation order to be able to adjust or change locations in order to find the optimum coverage. It also relates back to the data issue and the identification of popularity of routes and destinations. If there is a reliance on bike share data only, then there is a loss of data in those areas that are not effectively served by the scheme. Portsmouth Cycle Forum supports the recommended action to approve the bike share expansion strategy in Appendix A and looks forward to being able to promote an expanded developed network of bike share facilities to help to achieve the aims of our City to Share strategy. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. My thanks, Gareth, for the report. It seems as if this experiment is working reasonably well. I think we've absolutely made the right decision to have places where you have to bring your bike back to, so that I see other places where bikes are just littered all over the place, and I think it's absolutely right we didn't go down that route. So thanks very much indeed. And it looks as if we're getting a decent amount of usage of it. If we're getting 44,000 kilometres of people using these bikes, that's really, really good. And hopefully that can be built on. Who would like to go first? Brian, Graham, happy with that? Graham?
Just a couple of questions. I mean, Ian's actually picked up on some of the things I was going to really ask, really. The data is really interesting. And obviously, you can't put all of the data into the report necessarily, but I would be interested to know whether the scheme has actually started off fairly slowly. I mean, I was talking to somebody from Borough Bikes this morning, just casually. They were at an event, and I was there as well, and we were having a chat about the usage. As to whether, in fact, it's sort of grown slowly, and or because we picked out June as a month, obviously the summer is a better month, people use bikes more. It'd just be interesting to know how that has been taken up. The person I was speaking to said that they thought the university would be interested in taking more bays. I don't quite know how many bays there are around, because I don't travel around every bit of the university, but that's obviously an important one with students coming in the autumn. So a bit more information on that. And also I wondered whether the information that you've got actually does show where the cyclists tend to go, because that would be really interesting if we've got any data on where they're actually going. Yeah. So obviously I wouldn't expect it to be in this report, but it'd be really interesting to have a look at that if that's available.
I'm sure Gareth can provide.
The second point is, I was really interested in the map which shows the demand. It shows that there is a lot of demand for it, and I think interesting, Paulsgrove, Cosham, areas which haven't necessarily been well served by this sort of general transport are really looking for it. So I'm hoping they'll get expanded to there, as soon as we can. So that's good.
Great. Okay. Gareth.
Yeah, I would say certainly getting the data from Bike Share and indeed from the e-scooter scheme is paramount to the sort of wider transport planning and infrastructure sort of priorities. So the Beryl scheme is still in its infancy. I think that it is a promising start, but once the user base starts to increase, we'll be able to draw more conclusions from that. I think certainly the comments that we heard from Ian and as well from Councillor Heaney are all very much in line with what we're wanting to do. And as always, I'll be very happy to share any further data that we're able to obtain from Beryl to help with those trip planning purposes.
Okay. Graham, with that reassurance, are you happy with this? Brian? Lovely. Okay, sold. Gareth, thank you very much indeed. Although you almost ruined it by introducing Voy at one point, which was just a bit dodgy. It seems to me they are... I get very, very few people upset by the bike hire scheme, and I get lots and lots and lots of people very upset about scooters.
Just interestingly, I've only seen one bike left on the street. That happened to be around the corner from Milldam Building on the way to Gunwolf. I don't know why it was
clearly
there.
Somebody who's getting married.
Well,
then.
yeah, but apparently they fine people 10 quid if you don't put it back in the box. But I've only seen one, so that's...
So the ones I've seen have been where all the docking things are full, and so people just put them next door to it, which I thought was fine. But it's probably somebody getting married, and they only went one way. Okay. So thank you very much indeed for that. That's that one done. Okay, let's move on to Stamshaw North parking zone. And I think, Barbara, you're going to introduce this.
Thank you, Councillor. The City Council is currently progressing a programme of residential permit parking zones in various areas across the city. Stamshaw North was identified as an area where a permit parking scheme is likely to benefit residents. The proposed zone is bounded on two sides by existing permit parking zones and correspondence from residents suggests that the area experiences a certain level of displacement parking from residents of neighbouring zones, likely to be their third or subsequent vehicles in a household for which permits are not available. A questionnaire survey of residents was carried out in September 2022. The outcome of that survey showed that the majority of respondents was in favour of a permit parking scheme. Given the outcome of the questionnaire survey, a scheme was designed and the proposals were formally consulted on in March this year. Representations received were less clear-cut than the questionnaire responses, with 55 respondents in favour and 57 against. On further analysis, it was found that the majority of those in favour were in the south of the proposed zone, where the roads are most affected by displacement parking from surrounding zones. Consideration was given to recommending that the scheme is implemented only on the two southernmost roads in the zone, where the majority of respondents are in favour. However, given the likelihood of parking being displaced further north and the prospective major residential development in Tipner, it is recommended to introduce the scheme in its entirety. I have two written deputations. Would you like me to read them now? Okay.
Thanks, Barbara.
The first is from Kelvin Neal, a resident of Twyford Avenue. Dear Sirs, with regards to the proposed Stamshaw North parking zone, FJ zone, I wish to inform you that I object to the proposed parking FJ zone. It is noted that this proposal is based on a survey of 1,381 properties, of which, for reasons not stated, only 369 replies were received. This is just under 26.8%, which I consider is far too few on which to base a need for this parking zone proposal. I wish to state that I did not receive one of these surveys back in October 2021 and therefore was not given a chance to participate or express my views at the time. It is also noted that the Council has aggravated the situation in recent years by allowing more HMOs to be established than the current parking area can accommodate, knowing that these HMOs will inevitably have more than one vehicle per property. It is also realised that some of these HMOs are on the part of Twyford Avenue, which has double yellow lines outside, and therefore any associated vehicles will be parked in the side roads. A lot of one-man small businesses that operate from their home with a commercial vehicle such as transits have no alternative than to park near their home. This will result in extra costs and may well put them out of business. What arrangements will be made to allow carers to park to perform their duties for the residents in the area that need community care? Please note that these carers may have more than just one resident to attend to and therefore may be parked in the area for more than the 2 hours allowed. Yours truly, Kelvin Neal. And the second deputation from Sam Milson, a resident of Walden Road. Dear Portsmouth City Councillor, Councillor for Transport, I understand this is a tad late. However, I have been on holiday and just seen this email as it was only sent out 5 days ago, which is far too late and unreasonable for people to reply in such a short time. However, with hope you will agree that this is unreasonable timing or in the least kind enough to accept this in late on your deadline. Please can I press the Councillor for Transport for a deputation against Portsmouth Parking Scheme, Stamshaw North FJ. This is being asked for in a time of national crisis of financial difficulties, when people cannot afford to heat their home or choose between feeding their family or heating or are resorting to food banks. We are not in an affluent area. The main people in this area are privately renting, council housing and HMOs, including along with private owners. Myself included, along with the residents of the Stamshaw North area, cannot afford this fee for additional parking. It is a tax forced upon us. I live with my family and parents due to not being able to afford my own home. I have my own car, as do my parents, and now you are being asked to consider forcing me to pay for the privilege of parking in my own childhood street with no other alternative. This is cruel, and as honourable as the notion is to prevent commercial vehicles in this area, it won't work. We will continue to see commercial vehicles regardless of the permits, and with the extended areas given permits, how will they be policed? Stamshaw residents will be forced to pay for this and will not be given the service they pay for. Additional to this, the result will not be the positive one that is being asked of you today. What evidence from other areas is there to suggest that this is effective? In any event, it is not worth the cost to me, which will now ask. Either I pay for my new parking permit, as it's the household second, or pay our electric. I work for the public, out of county and finish late, so need my car. It is not an option to lose my car. Please hear my plea to deny this proposal for Portsmouth Parking Scheme, Stamshall North, FJ. With thanks, Sam Milsom.
Thanks very much indeed, Barbara. And then we have various people here who've come to do deputations in person. So we've got Mr. Gould and Mr. Dudley. Who would like to go first? Lovely. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Mr. Dudley. I replied to the first email after the results of the survey regarding the FJ zone were published and copied my thoughts on the subject to my local councillors. I understand that they may not want to take sides, but although I received a reply, it was a bit disappointing that none of them were prepared to meet with me and see and understand the problems at first hand. A picture is worth 1,000 words. I've lived in my property for 44 years, and although parking has become more of a problem over the last 20 years, with a little bit of patience, it is manageable. I accept one of the reasons for this is that there are more vehicles now, but a major reason is that the council keep accepting more HMOs. Where we once had corner shops, we now have an HMO with numerous occupants. Only recently, what was once a shop on the corner of Grunnison Road is now an HMO with quite a number of rooms, I believe 10. With regard to the proposed residence parking zone, I'm vehemently opposed to it for numerous reasons. I live on Stamshall Road. With no parking outside my house due to double yellow lines, my parking places are limited to 1, a number of spaces on the opposite side of Stamshall Road from where I live, that's 14 spaces. A few more, that's 9 on Twyford Avenue. And other than that, I have to park in one of the roads off Twyford Avenue, usually Grunnison or Jarvis. Now, for those 14 and 9 spaces, there are 33 properties between Wilson Road and Penrose Close and Grunnison Road, some of which are HMOs, and they're all on Twyford Avenue. And there are 18 properties on Stamshall Road, also have the same problem and try to use these few spaces or parking on adjoining roads. It's obvious, even with residents parking, that residents of these properties will still have to park in the roads off Twyford Avenue. I understand why the residents of Grunnison, Strode and Jarvis Roads may opt for residents parking, but they've got to realise that this will make little difference, as we in the no parking areas will still need to park in their roads. Will this really get rid of the works vans? I doubt it. The bottom line is that we'll all be paying £30 for the first car for the privilege of doing exactly what we're doing at present. That's driving around to find a space if you come back late at night. The only winner is the council to the tune of in excess of £40,000 a year. On the face of it, the figures look quite positive for residents parking, but when you consider that only 26% replied to the survey, and of that 26%, only 67% were in favour, then the vast majority were either against or failed to reply. If that was any other business, the status quo would remain. That's all I've got.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Gould.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and other members of the committee. Some of the things I'm going to raise, I'd just like to stress, are not a personal attack on some of the people who might have contributed it, but I'm going to be quite blunt, so my apologies if you were the author. I am against the proposal, just to make that clear. I would like to start by underlining some of the points that have just been made. Previously, similar schemes have been proposed and ruled out by the council because, and I quote, insufficient people were in support of the proposal. In this particular one, there's already been some statistics quoted. 17.8% of the residents supported the parking zone in the initial survey. That goes on to the statutory consultation, which raised to 54.6%, but that 54.6% was against the proposal. The main points in the pack that you have before you are paragraph 4.4 and 4.5, which is at page 145 of your pack. There are a number of points that point quite clearly to the commercial vehicles or properties with multiple vehicles being the issue. The proposal that is put forward for you to agree does not address adequately the major concerns. It is a blanket response that is inappropriate for the issues around Stamshaw North. There are other issues, for example, the impact assessment, which in my submission is completely inappropriate and inadequate for the proposal that's before you. I will cover a few areas of the impact assessment in a second, but not least of which the reference in paragraph 4.8, which is at page 145 of your bundle, which give rise to the impact of congestion and air quality from the new development at Tipner North, which is completely absent from the impact assessment. And yet the impact assessment repeatedly says if you introduce the parking control zone, it will benefit congestion or the easing of congestion. The current proposal does not attribute parking fairly. Right? The proposals that are before you to agree or disagree require certain elements to be in play that do not reflect current modern living, and I will go into that in a second. And lastly, the paragraph 5.2 suggests that the parking permit scheme will increase space turnover because of the limit of the time of people there. This actually contradicts the impact assessment, yet again, where it says air quality will be improved. How can you have air quality improved when you have more cars driving around an area that is entirely residential? It doesn't add up. Going on to the impact assessment itself, which is on page 197 of your pack, it's totally insufficient and is erroneous in many ways. Page 198, which covers equality and diversity, there is a wonderfully crafted statement there. However, none of it is in relation to protected characteristics. All of the passion there is just extra wording to make the overall proposal look good. If you are an individual with a protected characteristic, you can already get a parking permit and you can get a guaranteed space. Right? So all of that wording is just there to make it look as though it's a decent proposal. Page 199, the health. The response provides no response about how mitigation measures can be applied to the scheme to address the negative impacts, of which there are a considerable number. The report recommends a standard parking zone approach and has not addressed any of the issues that relate specifically to Stamshaw North. The demand from residents is focused on a large number of commercial vehicles. The feedback specifically mentions coaches and vans parked for long periods of time in the neighbourhood. Many of these are believed to be owned or controlled by people living in the neighbouring areas subject to parking permits, but there is no evidence to back up that those individuals do not live in the suggested parking permit zone, so that may not alleviate the problem. There is a real assessment of the area needs to be undertaken, which would show, save for the previously mentioned vehicles, the number of people parking vehicles in the proposed zone who work elsewhere. The impact assessment goes on to suggest that people will reconsider how they travel to work and things like that. This is a residential area with businesses outside. I would put to you that there is already substantial consideration about how they travel to work, and those who can walk to work or catch the bus or use the newly appointed bikes do so. The rest, as you've heard from other deputations, use their cars because they have no other option. When I travel to London, which is where I work a lot of the time, right, when I'm not overseas, I cannot use public transport because the first bus runs at 6 o'clock. I need to be on the train that's at 6:05. I have to use a car if I'm in Portsmouth. The link in the impact assessment to healthier ways of getting to work is erroneous and unsubstantiated. There is no evidence put into that impact assessment at all. Carbon emissions, the section on impact assessment for extraordinarily poor in content. The permit zone is unlikely to reduce any carbon emissions and is very likely to increase them, as I've referenced before. The feedback from residents already shows that the people elect to walk to events rather than take a car to avoid losing a space. And I refer you to, for example, feedback response number 1 on page 151, which specifically sets out they elect to walk rather than use their car. Continually driving around the area is provided as an example about how emissions may be reduced. That in itself lacks fundamental understanding about emissions. Most emissions are produced when engines are cold or are commercial vehicles. If somebody is a resident returning to the area, their engine will be warm and the emissions are going to be negligible. That in itself ignores the fact with central government moving towards hybrid vehicles and non-petrol engines, that's going to be a lesser constraint in the future anyway. If the fear of driving around the streets is linked to carbon emissions, why is car sharing also promoted as an extra example of how it will benefit in the impact assessment? It doesn't make sense. Page 202 of the impact assessment talks about transport. All of these issues and factors are not relevant to the permit zone. I would suggest that they are, because there needs to be more accessible and sustainable and safer transport if that permit zone is going to be brought into place. And I will try and round off page 203, the economy and social value. Social value sector of the impact assessment, there's no evidence provided that air quality will be improved or the reduction in congestion will result. And we've already talked about the new planning for the TIPNA, which will work in exactly the opposite of that. The economy, it's actually ticked in the box that it's not applicable to this policy. I vehemently oppose that on the basis that there are businesses in that area and there is no reflection of the new ways of working post-COVID, where there are more people working at home nowadays. That is a business impact. I run my business from my house there. That is a business impact. It's implausible that it cannot have an impact. The proposal itself does not address the major concerns of the residents in the area, which is commercial vehicles and people parking vans and coaches and stuff. If the permit parking zone was amended to make it applicable and appropriate for the residents in the Stamshaw North area, it might get a better receipt, but at the moment it doesn't. Lastly, if I may, the finances in relation to this, which is at paragraph 8.3 and page 147 of your bundle, suggests that the council will gather approximately £25,000 to £30,000 per annum. That, when you look at the number of respondents that the initial survey was issued to, there were 1,381 houses. That already means that if you take £30 per permit, at the upper end of the predicted balance, that's 1,000 car parking spaces for 1,381 properties, ignoring multiple occupation or multiple ownership of cars. Bringing in a permit scheme is simply going to add more cost to the residents in the area for no real benefit. And the council's own financing scheme underlines that. There just are not enough parking spaces there, full stop. The one thing that needs to be removed is the big commercial vehicles. It is possible to adapt the parking proposal to make sure that it is those that are excluded from the area by making sure that if you are a van owner or a commercial vehicle, that needs to be permitted, and the council needs to put together a proposal that will make sure that only those that have the real need to be in the area are in the area and the rest are forced out. Sorry.
Thanks very much indeed. Councillor Hunt.
Yeah, huge sympathy for the passion from people who are opposed to this scheme, but yourself and I and Councillor Heaney, we've been around this particular subject for 2 decades now, and we know that when these schemes go in, if you agree to put them in, if you try and take them out, residents go absolutely bananas. And we had a virtual riot on one occasion when a previous Conservative council tried to take out 3 schemes, and there was a lot of anger around that. What I would like to do, Chairman, is to first of all point out on one thing that I think it was Mr. Gould said, or one of them said anyway, about the turnout of this scheme at 26.8. At the recent council election in Nelson Ward was 21%. So, you know, there's a little difference there. That's just a bit of context about so-called turnout. 1,381 homes were contacted in the informal survey. 369 were sent back, and the officers report this is about a standard reply right across the city in zones that have been consulted. 246 favoured a scheme, 117 were against. This is just over 2.2 to 1 in favour. We all know from our experience that when an informal survey has been done, residents tend to think that they've done their reply. So when the formal survey comes out, it's normally quite often you see a much lower response. Even so, this is pretty even, 55 for and 57 against. Mr. Chairman, if you were minded to just be driven by numbers, you would do Harbour Way, because one person said they wanted it and none said they were against it. If you were minded to look at Wilson Road, 8 people would said they wanted it, and Grunson Road 13. But in Strode Road, 8 people didn't want it and 6 did. So you can't just be driven by the numbers. You have to look at the overall picture in this. We have got 1,051 homes to be built in the new Tipner East development. At that planning meeting, which I was at, the council planning officers made it very clear that there would be insufficient parking on street in that area, and the likelihood was that those overspill parking would park in Tipner Road, Twyford Avenue, and all those roads, particularly in Tipner. And I do not want that to happen. I have to think about the future, whether I'm here or not, and the consequences of not doing a scheme would mean that we would see overspill parking into those streets. Despite what anyone says, if you look at all the objections, most of it's based around the cost, and I understand that, I really do, of the scheme. But if you strip the cost out, and we know too that we used to do it free, and that would have reduced any complaints, but a previous administration brought a cost in, and in some places we reduced that cost. But if you strip out the cost, people in there, if you look at the comments, many of them accept that there is a problem with parking. So I would ask you, Mr. Chairman, to take the 2 surveys together. You should not exclude, you should take into account the previous the informal survey. I would also say to you that I and the other councillors always, when we bang on the door, we say, what's the number issue around here? Every single time it's parking. People want parking sorted. That's what they say. You know it from your own ward. I know it from other places that I've been in. And they want the council to sort out the parking. I receive emails from people, particularly women, who come back late at night and they say they circle round and around and around and they get frightened parking away from their homes. The HMO issue is a live issue. We know about that. That is beyond our control. That is government legislation, which means that we have to allow HMOs, but we have brought in a 10% rule which tries to limit them. So we have done our best there, and I'm sure that people have seen today that 2 landlords have been fined £15,000 and £24,000 respectively for not complying with those rules. On the vans, there's a lot of assumptions in the people who object, and I quite understand that. They say that commercial vehicles won't be dealt with. Well, they jolly well will. They won't be able to stop there anymore. We also heard from one deputation that was read out by the officer the concern that one-man business, running a business from home, would be driven away. Well, that vehicle is capable of being registered to the house, so that won't happen, and they will qualify for a permit. So if and when the scheme comes in, and depending on your decision, the other matter that we receive a lot of complaints about is people parking on corners because of the congested parking. I mean, you go around at night, we all see it. People park on corners on double yellow lines or not double yellow lines, and they obstruct the sight lines. So if and when bays go in and the double yellow lines follow around those bays, the corners, we will find that this issue too will see that parking and traffic is better regulated. On the money side of things, we all know full well that these schemes aren't there to make money. The money is used to implement the schemes and then to subsequently police them. So people should be reassured by that. If it were to go in, it would be properly policed. I heard people talk about nightmares and other streets and so on. But I mean, what I would say to you is we go to the rest of the ward, North End, and to other parts of the ward that do not have the benefit or otherwise of a resident parking scheme. And we get asked over and over and over again, when are we going to get a scheme here? So I would suggest to the gentleman here and those people who may be watching online, if it's not done today, with all the other schemes that are lining up to be consulted upon because people want them, this won't come back for many, many, many years, probably after they start building homes in Tipner East. And then we will hear an outcry. If you were tempted, and I hope you won't be, to split the area south of Tipner Road, all you would do would cause displaced parking from the south of Tipner Road to go into the streets north of Tipner Road. So Range Green, Harbour Way, Target Road would all be inundated with commercial vehicles. And we've seen this happen before so many times. When this kind of thing happens, a portfolio holder, a decision maker, tries to find some consensus as a result of the things that he or she has heard on the day and excludes a number of roads. What happens then is those roads then get very cross and they say they've got all the displaced parking. We have to try and somehow bring it all back again, and then that area gets done too. We have been in, we did not, as the ward councillors, get involved one bit. The deputations here are correct. We did not get involved. We would not comment because we thought this was something that the residents should decide upon. But we have looked at all of the evidence. We've gone round the doors. And today we are setting our views out. We didn't seek to influence it throughout the whole of the consultation period. We kept in touch with officers who told us what they were doing, the way things were going. But we kept clear of it, not because we were worried about it, but because we wanted residents to make their views known without influence from us. But now today I can bring you our experience, and all three ward councillors would like the scheme implemented as is in the report and recommended by the officers. Just check my notes if I may.
I
think I've covered it. Yeah. Anyway, I've gone over my time. Thank you very much for giving that to me.
Thank you.
It's a really important matter for a lot of people in that location. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And lots of helpful and useful points being brought up by people throughout this. So I live in an area that wasn't and now is, and has a two-hour effectively exclusion for non-residents. And our experience has been that it's helped enormously getting rid of cars that were just dumped for weeks and weeks and never moved. And it hasn't made an enormous difference, but it's made a noticeable difference. And that it's the commercial vehicles where somebody's running a one-man business from home are fine because that's where they're registered. Vans from British Gas or whoever have gone because they're not registered there, so they can't park, and that's made some difference. We have both Councillor Hunt and I have the joy of being on the planning committee, and we struggle with HMOs all the time. I think we are continuously advised by the planning officers we have the toughest policies to stop HMOs of any council in the country. In Fareham, Gosport, Havant, you don't have to have permission to. You can do it, become an HMO with no permission. Here we try as hard as we can to limit them, but we do so within the bounds of government policy, which is gives us some power, but fairly limited powers to say no. And if we say no locally, developers always can appeal to the government inspector, who then gives permission and then sends a large bill to the council for council taxpayers to pay to give to the developer, which I hate doing. But I think the issues, those are fairly standard issues. The issue, I think, here is that the area to the south, people are, of this zone are being fairly clear that they want something. It's much less clear in the north, and the judgment to be made is knowing from other schemes, when a scheme comes in, there is displacement out to surrounding areas, and we just know this. That's why we have a rolling programme. If I said yes to one just in the south, then there would be displacement up into the north of this patch, as sure as eggs is eggs. So do we, at which point people will be cross and demanding a parking scheme. So do you do it in one hit, or do you do it in two, or what happens? Because it's clear for the people in the southern bit of the patch that this is what they would like to happen. I think my feeling is, and I'm happy to be advised by others, that it's best to do it as one, but write into this that there will be a review, including a survey of every house within 6 months to see what people think, so that we can, if people say no, we hate it, we can take it away again. If people in one bit say we like it, then that can stay, and in another bit they say no, it doesn't work for us, we can take that bit away. But I think it's probably, we did this, I think, with the MD zone, and we went back after the event, there's the area around the King's Theatre, to ask people what they thought afterwards, and that was an interesting thing, because that was very, very close, very finely balanced about whether it should come in or not. And 6 months later, there was a very, very clear view about what should then happen. But anyway, but colleagues, Graham, do you want to go first?
Yes, just to correct you on MD, there was support for the scheme. The issue was the timing. There was no clear indication of what the timing was, and I asked for the timing to be obviously agreed and then reviewed after 6 months, and then in the end people were satisfied with it, so it worked very well. So that was it. I have a few questions. So preliminary questions, which will then lead to another question. First of all, can I ask, when were the FG zone, the FD zone, and the FH zone implemented?
Now, it's on the little map that Denise may have on her computer. It's in tiny writing from memory.
Chair, we can look that up and come back to you.
Well, yeah, but Graham's subsequent question will rest upon your answer.
Yes.
You had it on a piece of paper earlier, Kevin, and as always, a piece of paper is useful.
I don't have that piece of paper with me, I'm afraid, Chair, but we...
I wasn't intending it as a trick question, I have to say.
No, I know you weren't, but...
I mean, I think the FH zone was introduced some time ago because of the proximity of the Mountbatten Centre, and there was real concern that people were using that road as a parking space rather than going in and using the Mountbatten Centre. And so the initial one was introduced there to protect that.
And it's just Twyford Ave.
And it was just Twyford Avenue. That was a very small one for that specific reason. The FD and FG zones, I can't remember the details of when they came in, but what my question is, they were obviously implemented before the FJ zone. So why wasn't the FJ zone considered? Because you've created an island. You've blocked in this group of residents who were trapped by residents' parking zones, and I couldn't understand why the FJ zone wasn't considered at the time. I mean, it's part of this issue about rolling out the programme. The rolling out the programme is all very well, but when you trap a group of properties like that, it's not a very sensible thing. So I was cautious why that was done and why it was good.
Oh, yeah, okay, so...
All right.
And...
Could I just raise a point of order, please? That because it was consulted, residents did want it, but there was an insufficient number of them.
Yes. So, I know that's very helpful. We did have a policy of saying there had to be a threshold. One of the things we then found was that people who didn't want it were then incentivised to not reply because they could kill the scheme by not having enough people reply. And that happened in several places. So in the same way as we have with council elections, now we do something and there is always a result, however many people vote. And as Councillor Hunt said, the choice about whether to have a parking zone, you got a higher turnout than you get to choose who the councillors are, which is depressing, but real. Graham, I think
that sort of answers my point about how we got to where we are. Which
Yeah.
is what I was interested in finding out. My next question relates to the zone. I mean, you described your zone, which is actually 2 hours restricted for non-users. This is a 24-hour scheme, as I understand it, with 2 hours available for anyone who is a visitor. That's what it says in the report. I'm assuming that's still correct.
And
Yes,
Kevin,
that's right.
Kevin, you have a.
Got the dates if.
Far away, Kevin.
Oh, sorry. The FH zone was the end of 2018, and that's the most recent one. That's the Twyford Avenue, and that was, as I think Councillor Heaney suggested, introduced because of the Mountbatten Centre. The other two zones nearby were FG, which was May 2012, and the FT zone in 2007. So the two main zones bordering it have been there for a considerable amount of time.
Okay, and they would have come in under when we had the 24-hour zones, and in the same way where we've got zones like that, having ones that are like the new ones lumped into the middle of it just doesn't seem to work. So it's sensible to be consistent.
I understand the reason for the consistency, but you were describing a slightly different scheme, which was that. Now, it also says in the report that when there's pressure on parking space, the maximum resident permit allocation is 2 permits per address. Will this zone only allow 2 permits per address?
Kevin?
If there are more permits applied for than spaces, then it will, yes, and which is likely to be the case. But if there are fewer permits than spaces, then we do issue more than 2 permits because the space allows. Also, if I could just say, in terms of HMOs, with a residence permit zone, they are 1 address. So where we have that limit and where there is pressure on space, they will have a maximum of 2 permits. Even if they have 11 rooms, they would only be able to get 2.
And the one thing I find strange, Kevin, is that we've got quite a few parking zones where we've issued more permits than there are physical spaces, but I almost never get moans from people saying, I can't get a space. And there just must be a proportion of cars that are always never there or not there.
That's right. Obviously, the idea of the permit zone is to reduce the number of cars overall, and they can work with more permits than spaces because, as you say, people move around.
Okay. Graham, sorry, Karen.
So at the time of the consultation, people didn't know whether they would have 2 permits or more. Right, okay. Just on a bit of clarification, on on page 52 of the deputation of the respondents there, the person responding says that I note it is proposed that apart from the area in Oisia Close by the allotments, 4 hours parking will be permitted. I didn't see the TRO, so I don't know whether that was the case. Is it the case that the allotments area in Oisia Road will allow 4-hour parking? Because the question is, are the allotments like local or are they from other people? I mean, I have just acquired an allotment and sometimes I'm on it for slightly more than 4 hours. More than 2 hours, that's for sure. So if people are going to use the allotments, they will need to be able to park there for longer. So is that the case? Are they going to be allowed to park for 4 hours?
That's right. There is a parking place along Oisia Close which has an allowance of 4 hours parking. I believe there is some parking within the allotments themselves, but that's for an overflow and an extra, and it's away from the residential properties, and currently that part of Osier Close further up gets blocked. There's garages on one side where people from the allotments parking. So we provided a small amount of parking for them further along the road away from the residents.
I mean, that's really all the questions I had. I will make a brief comment. I mean, just to explain for the deputation who may not quite realise this, although I'm here at the meeting, I have absolutely no decision-making powers at all. It's all down to the cabinet member who makes the only decision. Yep. I can merely comment or ask questions. And with these things, because it's not my area, I tend to, bow to the local ward councillors who we assume will know what their residents want. But I think what I've highlighted in the questions does sort of produce some of the concerns I have always expressed about residence parking, that we don't do them necessarily clearly and comprehensively. We shouldn't be leaving areas left, to be surrounded by others. We should think about the consultation and how we do that. And inevitably, there is spillover, and so therefore we are going to have to do this where this is wanted. But we did have an example in Cottonwood where there was no actual real problem in the area in respect of outside influences, businesses or whatever. It was just that the residents had too many cars, and when they realised what the implications of this would be, they very sensibly said, no, we don't want a parking scheme because it isn't going to make any difference at all. There's still the same number of vehicles, still the same number of road spaces, and it won't make any difference. So as I say, in looking at these things, I think we have to be careful about that. I will leave the decision to the cabinet member who knows best what to do in this situation.
Brian.
Well, I can only speak as a newbie because the three councillors sat in front of me have been here for a million years, although they're a lot younger than me. And I'm the old man and the new kid on the block. Generalising what you were saying about the 2 hours or 4 hours maybe, I think it's great. British Gas should park their vehicles where they are, and the driver of the vehicle should get on his bike from British Gas, wherever it may be, and along with all the other commercial vehicles. I understand fully what you're saying over there, but the council, no decision at all is not up for consideration. Decisions have to be made, and people are going to be hurt by it or love it, whichever it may be. But it's the council's responsibility to make those decisions for the future of Portsmouth. I've been here, I've been driving 60 years, and I've lived in various parts of Portsmouth, but 60 years ago we was having parking problems, and I don't know how we solve this because there is more and more cars. We know we're trying to do this enterprise car scheme, etc., to take cars off the road, which would benefit us all, but at the end of the day, there's still going to be far too many cars. HMOs, I'm on record as being 100% against because they cause this sort of problem that you're on about. A place along by you or you or you or you or you could go to an HMO. You could have 6 people in there, 6 lads in there, and 6 lads have got cars. So where are they going to park them? So it's an overall problem, and it's not a modern problem. But I think the council, which again, it's not Graham, Lee or myself, the council have to make a decision. If that decision is that we go ahead with the parking scheme or we don't go ahead with the parking scheme, I personally will back it 100%, because I think sometimes we have to make difficult decisions, and we just have to do that, and that's for the future of Portsmouth as a whole. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So it seems to me that the possible decisions are either A, say...
Could I just interject once, if that's right? If you're minded to do a review, which was policy before, until we changed the policy, 6 months is not long enough, in my opinion.
People get to... I think people get to decide pretty quickly if things work or not, particularly around parking, because it's something that affects people every single day of their lives. So it seems to me the decisions that are possible are either to say yes to the whole thing, no to the whole thing, or yes to part of it, geographically part of it, the southern bit, and say no to the north.
Mr. Chair, if I may interject, there is another option, just so we have the full extent. is amend the actual basis of issuing the permits?
We can't. My understanding is that the way of the only way that works to be able to clear commercial vehicles out is a residence parking zone. In other areas, we have no, but where there isn't a residence parking zone, we have no power to stop them, and therefore, we have to make sure that there's the same criteria across the whole of the city. We can't vary the criteria from parking zone to parking zone to parking zone. Otherwise, it'll just become impossible. So, my view I think, is that I'm going to say that we will say yes. I will say yes to the scheme as a complete area, but that in February of next year there needs to be a review to every house and a report back in March. And Barbara, you're worried. Kevin, you're worried.
Sorry, John. Yeah. Could we say 6 months after it's introduced? Because
I'm Kevin. I presume you're working at great speed, and that the contractors are waiting outside this building now with the paint to go and do this.
We will work at great speed, but if it's safer to say
it's tomorrow,
6 months after it's introduced. Could I also just say that we can do a survey of the residents in 6 months' time. If we are going to withdraw the scheme, though, we would need to do a full TRO consultation.
But I wanted, we need to. So thank you very much, Kevin. But I'm going to stick to February because I'm hoping that you're going to work with enormous speed. But I'm going to be realistic about what contractors are like.
I'm really sorry, Leader. You can't do February. I'm really, really sorry. I know you can if you want to. But you can't because it just will be ridiculous. This might not get off the ground until Christmas.
Well, so Kevin, when do you expect, if we say yes, when do you expect it to be in?
It will take quite a few months because we have to procure the contractor, get the signs, we have to write to all the residents.
So it's not, you haven't got people outside waiting with the paint van?
No, Councillor.
Oh.
And we've got to make the order, as Barbara points out.
Okay, all right. I shall be. I know. All right. So I think the point was it should be 6 months. I was just hoping that that Kevin, you would move with enormous speed. But if we're going to move at as snail-like speed, we'll need to be realistic. So 6 months. Okay. So then. 6 months after the scheme is in, there needs to be a survey and to report back. And I think the options should therefore be with asking residents, do they A, want to keep it, or B, do they want to get it removed? And then we need to look geographically what different roads say, because if again there is a north-south split, and the people in the north say they don't want it, and the people in the south say they do want it, then people have had the experience of what it's like, and they've made an informed judgment. So the formal decision is that the parking zone should come in, but that there should be a review after 6 months of it being operational for residents to be able to express their view about whether they like it or not, and that should be reported back in a formal report to the Cabinet Member for Transport to take a decision about whether the parking zone should continue, whether it should be amended, or whether it should be removed. Okay? Kevin, is that workable?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. That's where we are. That's my call. So thank you very much indeed, everybody, for coming for that issue. Okay, moving on. Number 8, bike hangers and bike corrals. That's Michelle.
That's correct.
Do you want to say words of wisdom?
I will. I will introduce, and then I believe Ian has a deputation.
That is correct.
Okay. So bringing the bike hangers and bike corrals report today, the recommendations that we would like you to consider, Councillor Vernon-Jackson, are to approve the permanent...
Michelle, hold on. Mr. Dad, Mr. Gold, if you want to disappear, if you want to stay, you'll be very, very welcome for the rest of the meeting. And it'd be lovely to have your company. But if you don't want to stay, I will be deeply unoffended if you feel you want to wander off. Okay. Okay, thank you. Michelle, sorry to have...
No, thank you. And the recommendations today are to make permanent the provisions of ETRO 67 to 2022, the second phase of bike hangers and corrals in various roads in the city, with the exception of the bike hanger in Landguard Road, and to make permanent the provisions of ETRO 37 2021, Part B, relocated bike hanger in Lucknow Road. The bike hangers were launched in spring 2021 under ETRO 37 2021 to make provision for secure cycle parking, which are referred to as bike hangers within this report. They are secure lockable pods which are installed on the footway if there is sufficient space or in the carriageway, and there are bike parking spaces within those secure lockable pods. At the moment, as part of the trial scheme, those are free. If the scheme is made permanent by way of this report, then we will be working on a charging system that will be equivalent to the first residence parking permit cost within the current RPZ programme. The first set of bike hangers were installed on Manners Road, Lucknow Street, Eastfield Road, Addison Road, Hunter Road, Clarence Road, Guildford Road and Salton Road. The second phase were Methering Road, Worsley Street, Binstead Road, Lennox Road, Collingwood Road, Lumsden Road, Ferry Road ×2, because one was removed from Landguard, and Francis Avenue. There is a methodology available, should anybody wish to go into this in more detail, of how those sites are selected, and there is an online website tool where residents can make their request as to where they would like a bike hanger. Currently, there is 180 plus bike hanger requests on that request tool. So we would like to make the experimental traffic regulation order permanent for all of the existing bike hangers so that we can move on to phase 3 of the bike hanger process, where a further, I believe, 16 bike hangers will be placed using the methodology on the network. The second part of the report moves on to the cycle corrals. These are secure additional cycle parking outside of popular shops or restaurants. Currently we have 2, one on Marmion Road and one on Southsea Beach Cafe. The objectives are to ensure that there are safe and secure places for people to park their bikes and encourage them to travel those distances by bike rather than taking the car if they choose to. A survey was carried out and the majority of respondents were very much in favour. The cycle corrals were monitored, they're both well used, and so by way of this report we would like to continue to install those corrals, taking into account obviously provision of on-street parking where those requests have taken place, and to focus on business areas and areas of entertainment and other leisure facilities. The finance for this is coming from the local transport plan allocation and also the capability fund that was awarded by the Department for Transport in 2021 and 2022. That's a summary of the report, but I'm happy to take questions on any of the points contained within it.
Ian.
Thank you. Portsmouth Cycle Forum has been extremely supportive of the bike hanger scheme, as it is a key delivery area for enabling those people wishing to cycle more to have easy storage of and access to their own cycles. And therefore they are more likely to choose cycling as a transport mode to travel around the city. Cycle security is the second highest mentioned issue after road safety when we talk to people about cycling in the city. Bike hangers and cycle corrals should be considered as sister schemes, with bike hire hubs being their cousin, as the bike hangers are located in residential areas for the storage of personal cycles at home, while the cycle corrals form the destination cycle parking at shopping, leisure and work locations, such as the 2 installed under the ETRO being considered in this report. Our members also highlighted concerns about the accessibility of the Marmion Road Corral, given that when on foot you have to access it from the carriageway side. It may be worth approaching other authorities about how they approach such issues. I noted only last night, as walking through the Waterloo area of London, there were a couple installed along the cut between the Old Vic and Young Vic theatres, and both are to the pavement to load in bikes in and out. Some members also remarked that there is still some progress to be made on the ability to store non-standard cycles such as family cargo bikes, mobility trikes or other wider or longer cycles that add to the mix of transport options in the city. This is also a more general ongoing issue with regards to the accessibility of the identified cycle network in the city, and one which the Council needs to address to ensure that they are complying with equalities law. We are pleased to read that despite a rejection of one site for a bike hangar, the unit itself was able to be relocated to another oversubscribed location, and we know that, as well as the bike hire hubs noted in our deputation on the previous item, there is a large waiting list for bike hangars from residents. We also know that further funding for another phase of hangars was included in 23-24 municipal budgets to continue the rollout of locations. This in turn highlights to the Council that there is a demand across the city for more cycle infrastructure. These specific ones might relate to cycle parking and storage, with many of the considerations for the bike hire scheme, bike hangars and cycle corrals are very similar. They involve parking transport options and consider the availability and accessibility for people to travel more sustainably around the city. As such, we look forward to seeing how these opportunities are factored into the Council's parking strategy currently being developed. As seen with some of the consultation comments about the Landguard Road bike hangar, there is still some education to be done with regards to highlighting the fee to secure a bike hangar space against the cost of vehicle parking permits, especially for second vehicles registered to an address. More people are being enabled and then choosing to cycle more often and for longer distances. More people being enabled and then choosing to cycle more often and for longer distances means that the cycle network itself needs improvement to meet the current design guidelines and ensure that demand and capacity is met going forwards across the lifetime of the Local Transport Plan 4 and its feeder implementation plan of the LC WIP. It therefore probably comes as no surprise that Portsmouth Cycle Forum supports the recommendation to make this ETRO permanent, and we look forward to the future rollout of more locations for cycle parking across the city. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Just some questions from that. Marmion Road one, it seems the logic will be that to be able to access it from the pavement, not the road, because I just think, as Ian has said, that puts people at risk. And for future ones, if we're thinking about it, can we swap it so that you access it from the pavement, not from the road? Pregnant pause.
We can certainly investigate that, yes.
Okay.
So I sort of slight note of balance would be it would depend on the width of the footway. Obviously, we want to provide accessibility for all types of travel, including pedestrians, but we will certainly undertake to do a thorough investigation about whether there is sufficient footway width for people to be able to manoeuvre bikes in and out, and also have pedestrians moving past that area at the same time. I will go back to the project manager and we will look and see whether there was a road safety audit done, and then we can bring a full response to the cycle forum.
Even rotating it through 90 degrees so that people are accessing it from where there's the double yellow line, not having to stand out in the middle of the road, would seem to make it safer.
Yeah, that sounds very sensible. Like I said, we will definitely investigate that and reach a solution that is balanced for all needs.
And my understanding, Michelle, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, is that all the current ones are full. Is that right? The ones that were currently installed have all been filled by people wanting to use them.
They are all full. They all have waiting lists.
Okay.
In answer to another point that Ian raised, the new tranche of bike hangars, we will be investigating. We want to be able to put in bike hangars that are suitable for adapted trikes, for cargo bikes, and obviously for families to be able to store different size of bikes. that obviously is then balanced against the large waiting lists that we have and the availability of space. But that is something that we definitely want to do in the next tranche of bike hangers.
Okay, and looking at the list of the numbers that people want them, there clearly are the needs for more. One question for you, the one at Methuen Road, we're potentially wanting to move. Do we need to say something about that here?
It will still be on the road, so if you're happy to approve that it will still be on the road, as you know, we've had discussions with other landowners within the road, and looking at the lay-by that you suggested, in order to move that away from the space that it's currently in, but it will obviously still be within that area.
Lovely, okay. I just wanted to make sure we weren't tying ourselves to something that, okay. Okay, Brian, any thoughts? You happy? Graham?
Just a question to clarify about figures, because maybe I misheard what Michelle said. I thought I heard you say 180 waiting. Did you say 180?
Yes, as I understand it.
And there is a higher figure within the report.
But the report says 450 further requests for additional bike hangers, which says a lot more.
Well, both of them are not going to be accommodated by the number we're going to have.
No, I understand that. So I just want to
Oh, no,
to
you're
clarify
correct, Councillor Heaney. My apologies. It was increased from 190 in 2022, so we have had nearly 300 additional requests in the space of a year. So,
I wanted to ask about that because clearly we've got people who are, if you like, on a waiting list for something in there where we already have them. I mean, we could probably find out from people what sorts of bikes they have if they're actually on our list. Like, do you want to put a cargo bike? Do you want to, and that would help us in deciding what sort of bike hanger to provide. I mean, yes, the idea that we provide ones which have, take different sizes of bike is a good one, but maybe we could think about that at least initially. And I was wondering, I'm assuming that most of the requests will come from around about the south of the city and probably on island, because off island you're more likely to have space, a garden or some sort of place to store a bike because your house will likely have space. Is that a correct assumption, or are we getting requests from the north as well, or off island?
Well, in 4.3, every single one of those roads listed, except Binstead, is south of Goldsmith Avenue.
So there is an increasing number that is off island. However, obviously the wards off the island do benefit from more space, particularly with sort of off-road parking, than the areas on the island. So it is concentrated on the island. The way that we locate the cycle hangers is obviously to try to keep them, try to have them off carriageway, because it cuts down on the risk that we've previously discussed about the cycle corral and pedestrians coming out into the road or onto the pavement to access the bikes, or cyclists, I should say, sorry. But what we also do is group the requests so that we can place the bike hanger in a place that is central to a group of requests. And your point about writing to those people on the waiting list, that will happen. So we've already thought that through, to have a letter to those people on the waiting list to say, are you still interested? There is potentially a bike hanger going in this location. Can you tell us what type of bike you would like to store in that? Because then we can obviously be more bespoke than saying, we have cargo bikes available, but they're 16 streets away from you, that sort of thing. So, so there will be that process of refining done with the third tranche of the bike hangers.
And funding for this is coming from?
LTP.
LTP, yeah.
The budget that we passed in February.
That's for the third tranche.
Yeah.
The previous two tranches were from what was called the Capability Fund. And also the capital budget 21-22 had a separate bike hanger. So both the administration and the Capability Fund for the first two tranches.
Okay. All right. This sounds eminently sensible. And there is a significant logic in this being in the parts of the city where there are the most terraced houses, because in the north of the city, or further north in the city, people have more off-street ability to park and secure and things like that. So this, in the same way as doing EV charging points in the areas where there's people don't have off-street car parking to be able to charge their cars, we need to address the reality of what people's lives are like. Okay, this sounds fine to me. So let's go ahead with that. And lastly, I think, but by no means least, Matt, moving traffic offences.
Thank you. Okay, so the purpose of this report is to provide an update on the application for moving traffic enforcement powers under the Traffic Management Act. This will be, implementation of these powers will be additionally to assist the Council with its ongoing commitment to improve air quality through reductions in traffic congestion and encourage behavioural shift around travel choices by keeping junctions clear and assisting bus reliability. And it's to seek approval for the delegation of the powers to the Director of Regeneration in consultation with yourself to submit the application for moving traffic enforcement powers. So the recommendations are that you provide delegated authority to the Director of Regeneration in consultation with yourself to authorise the submission to the Department for Transport for powers to undertake local enforcement of moving traffic contraventions in the City of Portsmouth. This includes all the required activities to achieve this. Also for you to note that a report will be brought back to this Cabinet after the confirmation of the delegation of powers from the DFT to request their use within the City. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. If we can change the recommendation, it should be Cabinet member and opposition spokespeople as well, to make sure that we get cross-party consultation in. And I think this seems entirely sensible to me, but it just seems, I think we're pushing it a bit to say this is going to make a big difference in terms of air quality. Trying to make sure that people don't park in or stop in yellow box junctions is about courtesy to other people. It'll probably mean the traffic moves a bit better, but it's not going to make an enormous difference to air quality. Matt, the power that I think would be most useful for us, which I know councils have in London, is to be able to catch people who break red lights, because that's really dangerous. I don't see mention in here of us being able to do that.
So I don't believe these powers do include red lights.
So the government are worried about the danger to residents in London when car drivers or lorry drivers break red lights, but not outside of London.
Yeah, so red lights will remain with the police for enforcement.
But that's nuts.
The powers are set by Parliament, not by...
okay, I rest my case. That's nuts. Michelle, you're going to tell me it's not nuts?
No, I'm not. No, what I was going to say was that absolutely correct. Red light enforcement is, particularly through pedestrian crossings and junctions, enforcement is carried out by the police.
Or not carried out by the police.
Currently, there are no red light enforcement cameras within Portsmouth or Hampshire, but they are carrying out a review, and they have asked us to contribute to that review with correspondence from residents where frequent flyers of drivers that contravene the pedestrian crossings, to identify those locations so that they can ensure to include them in the review.
Okay, great. Okay, Graham?
Just a quick question about the process. In paragraph 4, it talks about the process, which we presumably have to go through as a local authority when we're going to bring this in, consulting the police, I understand all that. But it says, carry out a minimum 6-week public consultation on the detail of planned civil enforcement of moving traffic contraventions. And it says, rather than whether people agree with the principle of moving, including the types of in a sense, it sort of seems a bit odd, because what people are probably going to object to is the idea that that's being enforced. I mean, if we're It does seem a bit odd because I'm not quite sure what they're consulting on. Yes, we're going to have this junction and it's going to be this one and yeah, if you say yes because you think it's a junction that needs it, fine. If you say no because you don't like it, it doesn't seem to be very odd.
Kevin will elucidate.
Yeah.
The point of the consultation, and the government's very keen that we do consult because these powers should be used only where necessary, is so that people have an opportunity to say if they feel that the signage isn't right or the layout of the junction leads to people doing that. And it's not just box junctions, it's bad right turns and traffic movements that can cause accidents both to pedestrians and cyclists. And we were looking for, part of our selection process was looking at those junctions that have the highest rate of accidents. So it should enable us to make those areas safer.
My understanding is that if we have to give examples into the ministry, and they then decide if we have the general power. We don't then have to go back for every individual junction to get their permission. It's just whether we've got a compelling enough case for the ministry with the examples we give them to allow us the general power to be able to do it anywhere.
Interesting, I mean, the box junctions have been around for donkey's years, you know. And, for example, there's one on Winston Churchill Avenue which is designed to provide a gap so that the fire service can get out and not have people blocking the road should they be waiting at the crossing or whatever. So, in a sense, it's funny that we've had all this, but you can't enforce it because that's what's the point of it, you know. And there is, in a sense, I also think, an opportunity to consider other areas. Now, I'm going to mention an area where I travel regularly and it is always slightly irritating. If you are travelling south on Milton Road toward you get to the St Mary's roundabout. If you want to turn right to go into St Mary's Road, people, particularly at the busiest times of day, always block the junction so that people can't actually get out. You know, they queue up around the roundabout and don't leave a gap for anyone who wants to go left. And that seems to me to be not only discourteous, but very irritating, and also helps to encourage, you know, more traffic jams and cars queuing. And I don't know whether you ever consider any other possibilities of putting in yellow boxes, but maybe that is one that might be considered at some point, because I think it does create.
I'm sure it can be. I know that the previous occupant of this seat had a massive row with Colas when they removed the yellow box further down on Milton Road at the junction with Goldsmith Avenue, and she was furious and stamped feet and demanded they put it back again. And she was absolutely right. No, I think Kevin has chosen the really dodgy ones.
And part of the 6-week consultation will be to ask people whether they know of any other or want us to consider any others.
Okay.
Put my mic on. The Gunwharf one, only the direction into Gunwharf is yellow box, not out. So actually at high times, Christmas, I've been caught coming under the railway bridge and I can't get across to go into St George's Road because actually they're not doing anything illegal, but they are blocking the flow. So
that's helpful, thank you. All right, okay. That's also very sensible, Kevin. Happy with that? No, Graham, are you happy with this? Brian, are you happy with that? Lovely, okay. Thank you very much indeed, sold. And I think that is it. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Sorry to have held you for so long, but it's right, we go through these things in Yeah, well, I'm sure we can go longer. We do have the example of the 13-hour council meeting that we could aim to beat. Yeah, thank you very much. Nice to see you. Thanks, folks.